It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. I'm very excited to have these two people back on again with me. It's been a bit, and it was definitely due. I am lucky enough to have these two people that have really spent a lot of time with me on a series that I thought was an amazing series, actually, and I was actually very, very proud to do that series. If you haven't checked out the Tarot series on the Occult Rejects yet with Megan and Mario, I highly suggest to go check that out. And today, in this episode, we will be covering the Scivias illustrations and two other illustrations that Mario pulled from Saint Hildegard. She is somebody that, for the listeners that are catching the live now, she is somebody that me and Lisa have covered in the past. It just hasn't dropped yet, but we did do a live. When we did the episode, we did it live, so some of the listeners may already know who she is, but people jumping on the live now, you may not know who this woman is, but we have covered her in the past. She is a saint, and she was pretty open about being a mystic and kind of almost an occultist in herself. And she did have what she said was experiences with God, and she kind of, took images and words and music and kind of used that to explain the experience that she had. And this woman was back from like the 1200s, so, or I think around then. I could be wrong with that actually, but I have to check my notes. It was around 1100s. I think she was at. But yeah, I got Megan and Mario on with me covering this interesting work. Megan, I'll let you go first. Let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find you, please.
Yeah, hi everybody. I've done some previous work with these guys before, and I'm excited to work with them again. So, just briefly about me, real quickly, I'm a practicing occultist, professional intuitive tarot reader. I teach various different classes. I do readings. I'm also a paranormal investigator. I do have my own YouTube channel. If you guys want to check that out, it's 7 Degrees, the number 7. 7 Degrees of Wisdom 81 is my handle on YouTube, and then I also have Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, so you guys could find me there. I'll give all the links to Nick, and he can put them down below. But thanks for having me. Excited to work with you guys.
Of course, and definitely people listening, go hit that subscribe button on her YouTube channel for real. Great work on there. She's even had Nick's on. Great guest. I have her coming on. She does some really good stuff, and I know I do have listeners that are into occultism and into paranormal. And I actually keep forgetting Megan is into paranormal. I'm going to have to start getting her on my show for more of that stuff. But definitely go check her stuff out. And you know what? I loved how you said you're an occultist. Because I think it was like maybe a month ago, somebody, I guess they were like questioning like a post or something, and I said, well, I'm like an occultist. And they're like, what? And they're like, I've never heard anybody ever say that before. And I'm like, what? You've never heard anybody admit that they were an occultist? I don't know. It was just weird to me.
Doesn't go over well with people, but I'm trying to dispel the cult means hidden. So
I think that's why I try to use it too, so people kind of get the idea that it's really not what everybody thinks it is. But yeah, I love that you use that word. Thank you. Yeah. All right, Mario, now up to you. Let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find all your amazing work as well.
Yeah, sure thing. So online, I would say that I'm more so a symbologist than anything else. And I cover a lot of work and a lot of symbolism and things like that related to astrology. And so that's kind of one of the foundations that I've built for myself, is covering the signs of astrology. Generally, I cover the sign during the sign itself. And so I make short videos about the various signs. But I do like to branch out and talk about other kinds of symbolism and things of that sort. But if people are interested in my work or a tarot reading, anything like that, you can go to symbolicstudies.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it.
Yes. And for people who follow social media, I just do want to make it known that, like, when I do shit talk about people charging for shit and stupid shit, I'm not actually talking about these two people. So just letting that be said, because they actually love what they're doing. So it's a little bit different when you're dealing with somebody like that. It's not for the money, in my opinion. I think it's because they actually truly love what they do. Huge difference. You know, excellent. And I wouldn't have them on the show if I didn't think they had something important to say. So there you go.
Sure.
All right. So I'm going to bring up some of the artwork. I do have like a couple of pages of notes. This is how I want to do it. I'm going to read a little bit just again to give you a background of who this woman is. Then we'll go into a few of the slides, probably 2 pages of slides. And then we'll go back to Megan, and she's got some notes. And then we'll go back to the slides. So we'll try to keep it fun and interesting. Hildegard of Bingen, also known as Saint Hildegard and Sibyl of the Rhine, was a German Benedictine abbess and polymath. She was a writer, composer, philosopher, mystic, visionary, and as a medical writer and practitioner during the High Middle Ages. She is one of the best-known composers of sacred monophony. Not sure how to say that right. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. As well as the most recorded in modern history. She has been considered by scholars to be the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. Now, monophony, how do you say that, is the simplest of musical textures consisting of a melody or tune, typically sung by a single singer or played by a single instrument or player. Could be a flute, guitar, whatever, without accompanying harmony or chords. Many folk songs and traditional songs are monophonic. A melody is also considered to be monophonic if a group of singers, a choir, sing the same melody together at unison, exactly the same pitch, or at the same melody notes duplicated at the octave, which I find very interesting because, in my opinion, that's exactly what Iron Maiden does. Their guitar players normally harmonize together in octaves. And it's just, In the early Middle Ages, the earliest Christian songs called plain chant, a well-known example is Gregorian chant, were monophonic. So that's to give you kind of an idea, and I do have some of her music I may play. The best-known writing of Hildegard of Bingen is a trilogy including Scivias, Liber Vitae Meritorium, if I'm saying that correctly, Book of the Life of Merits, and Liber Divinorum Operum, Book of the Divine Works. These include records of her visions, which a lot were apocalyptic, and are explanations of scripture and salvation history. She also wrote plays, poetry, and music, and many of her hymns and song cycles are recorded today. She even wrote on medicine and nature, and it's important to note that for Hildegard of Bingen, as for many in medieval times, theology, medicine, music, and similar topics were united, not separate spheres of knowledge. That is one thing that I have come across constantly, even with people that I haven't dropped yet, with topics that I've already covered. When you start getting back into, a few hundred years ago and back farther, all these people that were, in my opinion, were very influential in occultism or even knowledge, or just very influential, I think, in the occult community. They were all saying this same thing, that all even the 7 liberal arts, you had to actually know all of those about something to fully understand it. It wasn't supposed to be separated and fragmented. If you wanted to look at an image, you were applying it to all of those 7 things to get a full understanding.
Yeah, that's what a polymath is they have several, subjects that they know extensive knowledge about. And that was very prevalent in the Renaissance era. And a lot of them knew extensive knowledge about varying different subjects. But that's what a polymath is, and she was a polymath.
Definitely. And you know, it's another thing I'm noticing a lot too. Even with, well, I'm not going to get into it. Start running off names and examples. But I have noticed from covering prior topics that a lot of these people were also big into medicine or biology.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know, and it's like, I think we have to start entertaining the thought that, I mean, I don't know how it happened or how the situation came to be, but I do think at some point, hundreds of years ago, unfortunately or fortunately, because now we know how the body works, bodies have been cut open and looked at and dissected and understood, I think, way farther than most of us would even comprehend or think about. How was it even done without all that technology to look at it? Somehow they knew what they were doing because they were redrawing this shit, parts of the eye, parts of the body, inside their occult books. They had it. They had to have known what the inside of the eyeball looked like.
Right,
You know?
right.
And this is going back like 13,
sense.
14, 1200s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
know?
exactly. No, I know. I mean, the way I kind of been looking at all of this lately is I've been following this thread of information that suggests that there's 3 major symbolic traditions that the world has gone through, essentially. And in the modern world, we live in a very solarized sort of paradigm, I would say. And I almost think of like the rays of the sun, how the rays split off, right? The further they get away from the sun. It's like, that's how all of these different subjects, and that's what all of these different like areas of study have become, is they're all completely separated now. And so in earlier traditions, which it seems like the first major symbolic tradition was called the stellar tradition, or the polar or northern tradition. That's my perspective. We'll get into a little bit. Things were more cohesive. You know, there was this understanding of like a one, you know, of a singular sort of thing. And so it makes a lot of sense to me that you would want to have kind of that broad sort of understanding of all of these different arts and sciences and whatever, to get a true comprehension of what we actually live within and what, you know, the spirit world is actually all about. Everything is completely compartmentalized and fragmented now. Nobody's talking to each other. You know, you go to like a university or whatever. It's like you have all of these different departments, but they're all closed off from communication. And there's really no sort of like unity there, right?
That's a really good way to, it's a really good way to say it.
So that's how I see it.
Yeah. There was even in like I'll be showing it when we cover him, like Robert Flood. There's I'll have to send it to you, Mario. There's a thing that he drew that I could put up like right next to it, the same illustration that I have used to show the rods and cones and like the ganglia in your eyes. He like legit drew the same fucking thing. And it's like what the, you know, it's a long time ago. How are you drawing shit like that you supposedly need a Well, I'm sure you need a microscope today to look at. You know, it's just really weird. Like in that detail, you're like, what? That's like some Jack the Ripper type shit. All right, let me get going. I have like a page of maybe less than a page of notes left. Real quick with the Scivias that we're going to talk about is an illustrated tome. Where it was Hildegard. Was probably her most well-known famous writing, and it was her first. And it's called the Scivias, and it's that's Know Thy Ways, or Know the Ways. And that describes 26 of Hildegard's most vivid visions and is illustrated by 35 miniature illustrations. The book deals with interconnectivity of man in the universe, the concept that man represents a microcosm of the cosmic macrocosm. So even here, she's even entertaining as above, so below, and all that stuff. The 14 songs included in the final version are, I don't know how you say these, antiphons, a short sentence sung or recited before or after a psalm or canticle. And she also has responsories. Not exactly sure what that is. The lyrics are written in very cryptic style. The songs are arranged hierarchically by subject in pairs, with 2 for the Virgin Mary, 2 for the angels, and 2 each for 5 categories of saints, patriarchs, prophets, apostles, martyrs, confessors, and virgins. The relationship between the visions and the musical and the dramatic content at the end is unclear. According to Margaret Fassler, the visionary content, the songs, and the play were designed by Hildegard to support an educational program. If this interpretation is correct, then this is the only such program that survives from the Middle Ages. In Scivias, Hildegard of Bingen described a mystic philosophy full of archetypal images and a hero's journey wherein the soul predates the body and persists beyond experience on earth. Sounds like magic to me. Hildegard's descriptive visionary recitation of her visions framed a powerful and compelling perspective of existence and divinity that impressed many who would discover her work, including Carl Jung, who drew much from Scivias to inform his thinking. Hundreds of years after Scivias, Hildegard's mandala images would be reference point for Jung's process of individuation described in his Red Book. The story of the manuscript is almost as interesting as the book itself. Hildegard of Bingen's Scivias Codex survived Hildegard in separate manuscripts, 2 of which lasted 800 years before being destroyed within the last century. So one thing I do want to add, because of just saying that, the images that we are going to show are pretty much like renditions of like how they've been redone, and this is what's handed to us, and this is what her images supposedly are. So I just wanted to add that little bit in the beginning right there. I hope it wasn't too much, but for people who haven't heard who this woman is, I didn't want to just jump into her pictures and not have anything to say. So here we'll get into 2 of the 2 visions from the Scivias. Got image 3 here, the Tower of the Church, and then image 2 on the right, the Radiant. Now I think Mario, did you pick both of these yourself?
I did, yeah.
Okay, and I think Megan, did you pick one of them as well?
Yeah, I picked the Radiant.
Okay, all right. So I don't know if you two want to chime in.
Megan, you wanna go for it? I mean, I can if you want. It's no big deal.
Yeah, I'll just speak really briefly about the Radiant. So this one, I found a lot of occultism in this. So back then, the color blue was highly regarded as sacred. So whenever you see, art from this era and you see somebody painted entirely blue, it meant that they were sacred and divine. So we have the angel here, and then the windows that are on the clouds are stones. So there are 10 of those. So it kind of reminds me of the Kabbalistic tree of life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And then you have the figure down at the bottom, and then, God on top, or an angel on top. She kind of interchanged both of them the same way. Like, she regarded them both in the same light. So she would interchangeably use Jesus and angels at the same time for their divinity. But so you have the blue figure there on the bottom left, and it's covered in fruit. So I think we're also, some of her images are talking about the tree of knowledge, Adam and Eve. She referred to that a lot in her artwork and in her works. And so what I think is going on here is that the person on the bottom there is receiving the divine knowledge from God or the angels. And I think it's like a progression where you start up at where the angel is, which is Kether, and then you go all the way down to Malkuth. And so they're receiving, the divine knowledge and then trying to work their way back up. And to me, I don't know if that's what she was doing, but we have Tree of Knowledge information here, and then we also have the Kabbalistic Tree of Life and the 10 Sephiro, working your way back up. That's the goal. So that's basically what I had gotten out of this one. She was a prolific, I think she was a medium, because of the way that she received her information. She started having visions at the age of 5, and then she stuffed them down because when she would tell people about her images, they would obviously shut her down. And she would get these horrible migraines after she would have these visions. She was a very sickly person as well, and that leads into why she got into natural medicine there at the end of her life, probably like the last 20 years or so. So I was trying to wrap my mind around like her background so well, because that's going to explain more about why she had these particular visions. And I just thought, you know, it was, so that's why I have a lot of like information on her and how this all started for her, and trying to piece them together as to why she would have these type of images. And also, side note, she didn't paint them herself. She had her assistant paint them, and other nuns and priests that were monks. So that's another thing too. So we're going to have a little bit of, you know, crossover. She did supervise them. So, but I don't know. I think that's what the message is here, is receiving divine information. And then we have all the blue, which is a very sacred color. So I'll let you go after that.
Excellent. Yeah, for sure. So one thing I want to kind of lay a foundation for and kind of thread through this conversation has to do with the this concept of a center, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea of a center was actually way more important to ancient peoples than it was to modern people. But the remnants of this idea of a center, you can still see everywhere, right? So as an example, Nick, you brought up the mandala, right? So she has some mandala-esque illustrations, right? Cosmological, cosmographical. And so a mandala, when you look into mandala symbolism, the most important aspect of the mandala is the center of the mandala, right? And so the mandala itself is comparable to a wheel. And when you talk about wheel symbolism, you have to talk about the axle, which is the center of the wheel, right? And you have to talk about the wheel of heaven, in my opinion, because that's what it all comes back down to, is the heaven spinning around an axle. And so there's a whole branch of symbolism that is really just so fruitful. And I have to give credit to Rene Guénon. So I'll shout out this book that I'm currently working through. Rene Guénon, Fundamental Symbols, the Universal Language of Sacred Science. This guy goes in on a lot of stuff that I've been interested in for a long time. And so he was a Sufi, and he talks about axial symbolism. He talks about sacred center symbolism, world mountain symbolism, the cross, the tower, all of these different things. Because believe it or not, whether you're talking about the mountain, whether you're talking about the tower, whether you're talking about the tree, you're talking about a sacred center of some kind, right? And so this center speaks to the center of our universe, of the world, and also to self, right? So the chakras are spinning wheels, so they're considered to be centers along our spine. The spine has also been compared to a center. Our heart has been compared to a center. So everything has this sort of like, there's this center correspondence, this axis sort of correspondence. And the center has been looked at as this sort of ascension point, right? And so when you climb a mountain, as an example, you're getting closer to God. You're getting closer to the heavens. If you climb a tree, you're getting closer to the heavens, right? If you climb a tower, if you go up to the tower, you're getting closer to the heavens. And so the Tower of Babel story was all about trying to build a bridge between earth and heaven. So axle symbols, whether it comes in a tree, mountain, tower, etc., the idea is that it bridges the gap between the above and the below, right? In the Magician card, the magician is well known for having a wand in one hand. He's pointing it to the heavens, and then he's pointing down to the ground. He's basically saying, I am that bridge between the above and the below. I am the bridge between heaven and earth. Symbolically, this all relates to what's referred to as the world axis. And this symbolism was really, really important to ancient peoples. So as an example, the cross, what predates the cross is actually the pole or the stake, right? And even I just recently learned that the Jehovah's Witnesses, they actually proposed the idea that Christ wasn't crucified on a cross, but he was actually staked to a pole. And so there's a whole entire like thread here that's worth pulling at. And I've been getting into it on my YouTube live streams lately. But the mountain and the tower are both symbolic of bridging this gap between heaven and earth, right? And so when I see that mountain on the right-hand side, I do think of this ascension. And there are even cultures where they consider the mountain to be the point in which you cross over to the other side. I have a Tibetan Book of the Dead copy. What's on the cover? Just a mountain, right? This mountain is referred to as a central mountain. So some people might refer to it as Mount Meru, right? The Kaaba cube is kind of a symbolic correspondence with this central mountain. Because these sacred center points or locations are always the destination in a pilgrimage. Because the idea was that this sacred mountain existed in the center of Earth, because it's a symbolic sacred center. And so a lot of people sort of holy sacred site kind of has a correspondence with all of these sacred center sort of symbols, right? And so this center, symbolically, some people have said that it corresponds with the north being the center part of Earth, essentially, right? And this depends on your cosmology, too. So, but this idea of the center existing at the north, this mountain would be like the northern mountain. And I think you're totally right in bringing up the Sephiroth, and that there's 10 different little sort of images here. Well, this means that God would be like the 11th one, right? So if there's 10 points on this sacred mountain, this holy mountain, God would be the 11th point. The 11th hidden Sephiroth on the Tree of Life is Doth, right? Related to Thoth and death. But that Sephiroth, according to people like Kenneth Grant and stuff, that Sephiroth actually corresponds with the north. So the north has always been sort of compared to this sacred center sort of location. So that's what I see on the right-hand side, the holy mountain, this central mountain. Sometimes it's called a lodestone as well. This to me is, this sacred center is basically the Philosopher's Stone. This might as well be the Philosopher's Stone as well, but in the form of a mountain. It also, to me, is very much comparable to like the Holy Grail, right? But I wanted to pick these two images and the tower image in particular, because the tower is, once again, this thing that extends from earth to the heavens. And the ladder has also been compared to an axial symbol, or a tower-like symbol, or a sacred center symbol. So just like Jacob's ladder, right? You ascend to the heavens. Angels come down, go back up. You know, this is the stairway to heaven sort of concept, right? Which a lot of people have said that this stairway to heaven goes to the northern sky, which is really, really interesting. So the rungs of a ladder, or the steps, like the steps in Freemasonry, it all relates to the stairway to heaven sort of concept. And when you look at the description of this image in particular, the Tower of the Church, this tower isn't finished, which kind of reminds me of the Tower of Babel story a little bit, which God thwarted, right? So this is what you see in the tower card, right? You see this tower, the blasted tower, the house of God, literally coming down because he didn't like their game plan. So related to image 30 here, in the little description that I read about it, at the end it says, at its peak sit 7 strong defenses representing the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, and no enemy can destroy them. The number 7 always comes up with tower symbolism. So the Tower of Babel was said to have 7 main tiers to it. So this is modeled after like the ziggurat, and the ziggurats were known for having 7 main stories. And in fact, some people have said that each story was colored a different color, one for each color of the rainbow, because essentially what they were building was a rainbow bridge. And so these towers always correspond with the number 7 for a lot of different reasons. And the northern sky generally corresponds with number 7 as well, in large part because Ursa Major and Ursa Minor each have 7 stars. So when I see a 7-pointed star, when I hear the number 7 now, 7 days of the week, the 7 musical scales, things like that, there's a major, major correspondence with axial symbolism, right? The bridge between heaven and earth. And so this is what I found in Libra, which is the 7th sign of the zodiac as well. And so the fact that they included the number 7 here, 7 strong defenses, 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, is very, very interesting, because again, when you look into tower symbolism and axial symbolism, the number 7 tends to come up quite a bit. So that's what I'm seeing here.
And you're done with them, you think, Mario? You're good on that?
I mean, I could riff for a lot longer, but I know we have a bunch of other images to talk about.
Get to the next one. The one thing I did want to add that you had mentioned about, like, the whole ladder thing too.
Yeah.
Even when I covered Michael Myers, when he was trying to push like Rosicrucianism, and he was, saying that he had these experiences. I think he was even trying to prove to people, like he wanted to prove to people that I guess he was a magician or an occultist or whatever. And like he had, he was trying to, I think he might have been writing Moritz of Hessel Castle, something like that. And he was telling him that I think he had like an 18-stepped Jacob's ladder that he describes that, like, you know, as part of the ascension. And then, like, you know, around in the same time or not too much later, I mean, you have Robert Flood drawing that ladder to the heavens, you know, to the you know, so I mean, you have descriptions of like that plenty, I think, in the past, like what you're getting at, like the whole thing with the stairway. I think that is actually huge symbolism.
Yeah, and you'll usually see in Freemasonic tracing boards, I really have been decoding a lot of the ones that have the 3 pillars, right? So generally one pillar will be associated with the moon, the other pillar associated with the sun, but then there's this central pillar, and it's like, what is this central pillar? What's that associated with? And it's actually associated with what I call the stellar tradition or the polar tradition or the northern tradition. And so the central pillar is the pillar of transcendence, just like in the tree of life, right? So you have the 2 side pillars, but then you have that central pillar, which extends above and below the other 2 side pillars. And so that central pillar in Freemasonry usually has the Jacob's ladder thing kind of going on with it, because this is the idea that there is this doorway to the other side. This doorway to universe B, that's what Kenneth Grant used to call it. This is universe A, there's a universe B, and the symbolism of the gateway of the portal on the Kabbalistic tree, once again, is Thoth, that hidden Sephiroth, the 11 Sephiroth.
Mario. Right.
Yeah.
We'll get on to the next group. And then we have image 9 and image 33.
Image 9, that's really appropriate because 9 fits with the symbolism of what's going on here, right? Because it's a choir, or it's 9 choirs, of angels. And so just briefly, this is kind of what I'm talking about, is the mandala. The further east you go, the mandala and polar or northern or axial symbolism is way more in your face, and it's way more overt from what I'm gathering. And so whether it's the swastika, the mandala, the Sri Yantra, it all has to do with that sacred center. Let me read this comment real quick. The sun, the moon, the third pillar, which can only be the third body, the black sun. There's a black sun correspondence here for sure. So everything revolves around that point of pivot, right? And so it's not uncommon for there to be kind of like spiritual practices where you're meditating on a mandala because you're trying to get to your sacred center. You're trying to get to your still point within. You're trying to get to your true north. So you have to imagine this as almost like there is a north, south, east, and west. There's an illustration which we'll talk about this again. But north symbolically is the center, and then it's also symbolically upward. And so this is something that the ancients have done like time and time and time again. So that center point is the most concentrated point, but it's the point of ascension. It's the point of transcendence. It's like the middle of a cross. So before the stream, Megan, you had brought up a Rosie Cross book, right? So they have the cross with the rose right there in the middle because the cross represents crossing over, right? And so the cross is related to going to the other side, to going on this bridge, on this gateway to realms beyond. You know, so the mandala always goes back to this, and it represents the monad. It represents the one. It's holistic. It encodes the geometry and mathematics of a circle as well. This symbolism that I'm talking about relates exactly to your eye symbolism, Nick. You know, that there's a reason why that pupil's right there in the middle, and it's surrounded with concentric rings, right? And it's a sphere. So when I was looking into all of this artwork, there's a university that's actually working on presenting this choir of angels and other works of art from the series, and they're actually animating it and they're projecting it on a planetarium. Okay. Wow. So they're actually incorporating her music as well. So it's this whole entire sort of experience that they're planning. And so that means if you imagine this on a dome, because it relates to dome symbolism and it relates to spherical symbolism, the very top of the dome is where that white part would be. That is the top of the firmament. This is the middle of the firmament, that white dot, right? So the very top of the firmament, the middle of the firmament, is where the North Star is. So it's where the gateway is. It's the stairway to heaven. So that's what I see. But yeah, feel free if you guys have any thoughts about any of that, or if you guys just want to get into the images here.
The one thing I will add about, like, what you were saying about the mandala and the one on the left, me, Lisa, and Teresa even covered in the Eyeball series that, like, there was tops of churches that looked like this that very much matched inside your eyeball, honestly.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
very
yeah,
interesting.
exactly. Right. Yeah, this is, to me, old world cosmology. This is old world cosmology. This is old world symbolism. It's very, very powerful. And so, once again, this idea of a center, especially the center of the world, that was a major concept. And from what I'm gathering, too, a lot of people believed that the center of the world was the North, and that this was the original location of the Garden of Eden. There's this whole idea that humanity comes from the Arctic North, and that this is the genesis of humanity. This is where the Garden of Eden was. This is where the original utopia was, and that there was a migration away from the North, right? I think that this is actually encoded in the Tower of Babel story, is that there was a unified language to build the tower. The tower came down, God introduced all of these different languages, and then everybody spread out from there because they couldn't communicate with each other. It represents this central point of origin, and then everybody spread out throughout the world.
That's really, I mean, not to get too fucking, far out there with this, but, even with, like, the eyeball symbolism and stuff, and with the growing of the mound and the Garden of Eden, I do think this is a pretty wild claim, I guess, to make. But, like, I do think we were kind of talking about it earlier about, like, mounds or maybe mountains being your pupil when it changes inside your eyeball. I do think sometimes that the Garden of Eden, like you were talking about rising and falling, your pupil will eventually come back down and it will get bigger and it will get closer to the ora serrata. And in my opinion, when you start looking at the ora serrata and the vitreous humor nerves and the hyaloid canal, if you want to get artistic about it, you could have a tree and you could have a nice little garden on the floor as well. So I sometimes even wonder if the Garden of Eden is actually just that area of your eyeball. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of your work, man. I mean, I'm like, you're not wrong.
I'm just spitballing though. It's like stuff like with art.
Right.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah. Now you two, if you got anything else you want to say, or if there's anything you want to add, Megan, you guys can go. Or if not, we'll get on to Megan's notes. It's up to you.
I'll go ahead and let Mario do the other one as well, and then I will pop up because I want to talk a little bit about the Choir of Angels.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So image 33, the day of the great revelation, right? So basically, my understanding is that this is the end of the world. And the things that I see in it that relate to other works of art that I've interpreted before is relating to the... Yes, that's it. That's exactly right. Yep, 100%. So that would be the lodestone, which has a correspondence with the North Star, which has sometimes been referred to as the lodestar as well. So there's a relationship. Lodestone, lodestar. And there's a reason why your compass points north, right? And so, but what I see here, right, especially in that bottom sphere there, it's really interesting just how chaotic it kind of looks. And so I see things that kind of represent the four winds. It appears as though when she decided to conceptualize the four winds, she actually used more than one face to be blowing the wind. So I see one above, one below, one to the left, and one to the right. There's several faces, but this would be the north wind, the south wind, east wind, etc. So when you look at older works of art, before the universe was ordered, so when you look into chaos imagery, it kind of looks like this, actually. And so the deal is that look how organized and uniform the upper sphere is versus how chaotic the lower sphere is, right? So there is this idea that the primordial universe had all of the elements necessary. So water, fire, earth, air. And the four winds are present. I even have seen some images where it's like all of the zodiac signs are present as well, but they're all scattered. There's no uniformity. Sometimes there's a lot of smoke, or sometimes you can't even tell like what's what. Is this smoke? Is this water? Is this fire? Like what's going on? It reminds me exactly of this image right here. And it wasn't until God came and separated everything was there order and was there a pattern to everything. So you literally can see images of God separating the heavens from the earth, God separating the elements from each other. To me, this is symbolic of the world axis. It's literally everything was collapsed, amalgamated, until there was this separation, until the world axis came to be, until the pillar or the pole or the column or the world tree or the tower, whatever you want to call it, separated the above and the below. So then there was a space and there was structure, there was order. That's partly what the world axis represents. It gives you something to revolve around. It relates to stability. It relates to order, as I just said. So to me, it's reverting back to chaos. That's what I see in the image down below. We came from chaos, and now seemingly, according to Hildegard in her visions, we are returning back to chaos, basically. So that's what I see there. And then just this idea of number 9 with the 9 choirs of angels and stuff. 9 always going back to self, right? I'm pretty sure we covered this with the Hermit card. 9 plus 9 is 18, 1 plus 8 is 9, plus 9, that's 27, 2 plus 7 is 9. So no matter how many times you multiply 9 or half 9, divide 9, the digits always go back to 9. So 4.5 is 9, 2.25, that equals 9. So 9 has this very there's this creative, generative sort of principle with 9, which is why it relates to the Hermit card so well. So I think that's kind of cool that she embedded 9 symbolism with all of this.
Absolutely. And 9's considered a very spiritual number. It's used a lot in occult as well. So everything you said, yeah, absolutely.
Right on. Awesome.
All right. So I'll get on to, we'll go on to the next one. But Megan, if you have any other notes that you wanted to throw in there about this woman, I'll let you go, and then we'll get on to the next group of illustrations.
Okay, so the 9 choirs of angels. First, you have the seraphim, which are the ones that can view God directly. Okay, they're also known as the fiery ones. They're the highest order of a choir of angels. They serve as guardians or attendants before God's throne. And then there's the cherubim. They follow the seraphim in the angelic hierarchy. They're the second highest in the 9 order of angels. These angels are man-like in appearance, double-winged, and guardians of God's glory. Then you have the thrones, and they are mentioned by the Apostle Paul in Colossians 1:16. And then you have the dominions, and then this group of angels are said to keep the world in proper order. They're known for delivering God's justice in unjust situations, showing mercy towards human beings, and helping angels in lower ranks stay organized and perform their work efficiently. Then you have the archangels. They're called the great heralds of the good news because they are sent by God to deliver important messages of mankind. Then there are the powers. They're considered the warrior angels as they defend against evil, defending not only the cosmos but also humanity. And then there's the virtues. The virtues are known for their control of the elements. So some even refer to them as the shining ones. In addition to being the spirits of motion, they also assist in governing nature. Then there's the principalities. They have command over the lower angels. They also direct the fulfillment of divine orders. And then you have, at the lowest point, just regular angels. And they are closest to the material world and human beings. There are guardian angels. So that's what that picture reminded me of, and then she called it that. So I wanted to talk about the different choirs of angels so we can kind of get an overall condensed view of like what she was getting at there. And then, man, I really wish I could show that picture. I'm sorry, I messed that up. But when you guys, if you ever find, like, I'll send it to you, Nick, if you ever find it, like, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'll throw it up on the screen anyway when I make the episode.
Yeah. Okay. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about her. I have a lot of notes, so do you want me to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right, so she was a very, very interesting woman. So from a young age, she experienced ecstatic visions of light and sound, which she interpreted as messages from God. The visions were authenticated by ecclesiastical authorities who encouraged her to write her experiences down. She would become famous in her own lifetime for her visions, wisdom, writings, and musical compositions. So she was a Christian mystic. She was born in 1098 and she died in 1179 CE. She was a Benedictine abbess, a polymath proficient in philosophy, musical composition, herbology, medieval literature, cosmology, medicine, biology, theology, and natural history. She refused to be defined by the patriarchal hierarchy of the church, and although she was abided by its strictures, pushed the established boundaries for women almost past their limits. Along with her impressive body of work and ethereal musical compositions, Hildegard is best known for her spiritual concept of viriditas, which means greenness, the cosmic life force infusing the natural world. For Hildegard, the divine manifested itself and was apparent in nature. Nature itself was not divine, but the natural world gave proof of, existed because of, and glorified God. She is also known for her writings on the concept of sapientia, which is divine wisdom, specifically eminent feminine divine wisdom, which draws close to and nurtures the human soul. So when she was a child, she started getting visions in the age between 3 and 5. She was the 10th child. So usually back in those times, you gave if you had that many children, you gave one of your children up to God or as a tithing. And since she was the youngest,
That's what they did to her,
she actually got given to the church, where she met this other woman. Her name was Jutta, and she basically raised her. And then, so she actually taught her how to read and write. She didn't have any knowledge of any of this stuff. And then eventually she confided in Jutta and told her that she was having these visions. Well, instead of being discouraged from speaking about that, like she was with her parents and the society back then, she went ahead and started like writing them down. And then at one point, after Jutta died, I think it was like 30 years she worked with Jutta, and then she died. And so she became, I guess like you would call it like the head nun there. And then she was actually the first woman to be approved for actually publishing a book on her works. She was the first one to be approved by the Pope. So when the book got published and it came out, then she had a bunch of women that kept coming to the convent and trying to, study with her. And at one point she got mad because she had so many women coming in. She tried to kick the men out and make them go to another place. And when they refused, she left and opened up her own convent. And then it kind of went from there. And then she had several people that studied under her. She ended up creating like 77 pieces of art. There was one documentary that I watched, and I wasn't able to prove this. I was looking it up. But he said that it was possible because she was so into the elements and herbs and crystals and all that stuff that she might have been influenced by the Celtic druids of that time, because she was so into this greenness, this fertility, the earth being divine. So that she had a very, very interesting life. She would write letters to like popes and kings and queens and telling them like, you're doing things wrong. And she wrote letters constantly to people, kings and queens. People would come to her for advice. Mm-hmm. She was an absolutely fascinating woman, and she was a feminist in her time, which was unheard of in those days. And she didn't give a shit. No. She said what she wanted to say. And I just thought that was really interesting. So that's just a little bit like about her.
Yeah, that's great.
That
was awesome. One thing a couple things I do want to add. like you said, she did eventually like pull out and go and make her own spot. And there was like, I think at one point, like even like rich people or like prominent people were like, yo, what's up with this lady? And started like coming to the church. And like people started giving her flack about that. And she, but then like eventually I think she let somebody like get buried on the property. And I think like the church had an issue with that. And she was like, well, I'm not.
Because you got excommunicated.
Yeah, and she's like, well, I'm not telling you where it is. And they like stopped her for singing or some shit for like 6 months. And then like she appealed to like a higher church and eventually won. But I just thought it was funny how like she still stood her ground. Yeah. She never told them where this body was.
No. She also created her own words and used them in her music too.
She even created her own language. Yes.
Yeah, yes, she did.
Forgot about that. Yeah. Very impressive lady for sure.
Yeah. I got a little bit more too. We can talk about that, intermediately. So you guys could just keep going. And
all right.
Awesome. Go for it if you have anything to say right now.
So image 10, the Redeemer. This is like one of those paintings or views where you see the whole image and then one's like magnified and it kind of pops out on its own. To me, this represents like the ultimate microcosm, macrocosm, and then you have the flames, coming from God, the information. I like that she uses like the darker colors and has these they look like flowers, but I think what she's trying to represent is these stars, different, planetary systems. To me, this is exactly like macrocosm, microcosm to me. Like it's. And then you have the concentric circles again, and then you have the color blue, which was very sacred to them back then, very divine, and then coming outwards. So it's like the expansion of human knowledge and communion with the divine is what this one represents for me.
Gotcha. Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, something I do want to add real quick. I meant to say it before. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mario. I just don't want to forget
go for it, dude.
There's something you were even saying before, Megan, about like her getting permission for the book. Something that I thought was actually kind of impressive that I came across. Now, I don't know if the Pope sent people to her or if she left to go meet people that were associated with the Pope, but she even like went and explained her visions. And it got back to the church and they actually were like, yes, this is legit.
Yeah.
So like there was like something that they had to gauge her stuff on to know if it was legit. I think that goes back to that there are certain parts of magic where you are sharing a common experience. And when you can prove that, people understand what you're saying. You know what I'm getting at? Like if there's certain little things that are commonalities before the magic happens, I think explaining that to somebody, you could be like, yep, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Certain markers. I definitely think there is.
I think I figured out how to share my screen. I don't know. I tried it. There it is. Okay. This is what I'm talking about right here. This one.
Mm-hmm.
This one right here. When I was talking before about the choir of angels. So Kircher, this was his map of the soul. That's what that is. This is, a very occulted thing. Everybody who's ever studied like occult literature and everything, they've come across this right here. And it doesn't come out and tell you what it is. But I've heard from several other cultists that that's what this is. It is the map of the soul, to go back to the 9 choirs of angels on that one. And then this one right here was very similar. This is some more of Kircher's work.
Mm-hmm.
This is very similar to that concept as well. All the connections being made there. Then you have, the 4 winds. So I was able to share that real quick. So I just wanted to kind of show you guys. That's what I was talking about, was this right here.
Let's see, unfortunately, that was nothing that I found when I typed in what I was looking for. So I wouldn't even have been able to pull that up for you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Awesome. So when I was looking into some of these illustrations, I did come across the what the 6 dots represent there in the middle, within that middle circle. And so these are the 6 days of creation. And so the first little sphere there is heaven, earth, light, and darkness. The second sphere on the right represents the division of the waters. So this is a firmament symbol, which is actually beautiful. It represents the waters above and below, right? So you could see that there's waters above the red dot and then waters below the red dot. And then the third dot is the land, seas, and green. So these are basically the different days of creation. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 6. So the land, seas, and green. And then on the right-hand side of that, the sun, moon, and stars. So this gets back into the tradition that I'm referring to, is that we live in a solarized tradition right now. To me, it's obvious to me personally. So I think we live in a solar age right now, which was preceded by a lunar age, which was preceded by a stellar age, which essentially, when you're talking about the stellar age or the stellar tradition, you have to acknowledge the point of pivot in the heavens. That was their central concern. It wasn't the wandering stars, it was the fixed stars. And when you're talking about the fixed stars, you have to acknowledge that axle, which is the pole star, Polaris, the pole that everything revolves around. And then on the 5th day, that was what at least this list said creepers, fowls, and fish. So creepers, I'm assuming maybe are just like walking animals or things like that, rodents and maybe. And then you have, or just, it could just be mammals. And then the 6th day was beasts and mankind. So to me, it's interesting that, that they're all here, right? But there is that, that pole that extends in between the two sets of these circles, these glyphs, and it just goes upward. So once again, I like to break things down to like fundamental symbolism, which is very, very, very helpful. So it's implying that that pillar is a pillar of transcendence going up to those concentric rings up there. And when I saw somebody talk about those rings, they actually animated them and that they were actually spinning, and that the symbolism is that they spin. And so, spiral symbolism, spinning symbolism, very, very deep. It gets into axial symbolism. So once again, the axle and that things revolve around it. It's a huge sort of weave or thread of information that I keep on tugging at. And it's really kind of a fundamental thing to kind of understand. And so once again, the mandala, concentric rings, this idea of spin, pivot, this sort of sacred center thing, it's all right there. But all of this axial symbolism relates heavily to the pillar. So on the right-hand side, you have the pillar of the humanity of the Savior, right? And when you read about it, the short description that I have here copied is Hildegard describes the humanity of the Savior, who was born of the Holy Spirit, conceived by the Virgin Mary, and born as the highest Son. So what I think you're really seeing here potentially is, and I don't know, because I haven't really gotten into the weeds with her actual like text, the text that actually corresponds with this. But I almost see that there's probably 3 different or potentially more aspects of the Virgin Mary here. To me, down below in green, it kind of is hard to see here, but on the left-hand side of that pillar, you see a woman. She's holding a fleur-de-lis, and she also has a child in her lap. The fleur-de-lis has always been related to Virgo. So even sometimes there's a large star in Virgo. It's called Spica. Sometimes Spica literally has been called a fleur-de-lis. Virgo's holding a fleur-de-lis. Or sometimes she's holding a bundle of wheat, and that's what Spica represents. But the fleur-de-lis represents so many different things, but it's very, very feminine. One of the ideas is that Mary was given a flower before she had a virgin birth, and the fleur-de-lis is symbolic of that flower. She was given a lily in some accounts. And so you could actually look up paintings of this and instances of people talking about this and everything else. So the fleur-de-lis is actually symbolically representing the ability for a woman to have a virgin birth, essentially, right? This is called parthenogenesis. So there's still animals and stuff like that can have virgin births. It's also very interesting that the fleur-de-lis is oftentimes associated with France, because in the occult world in France, this underground sort of current in France, they have a strong reverence for the Black Madonna. And so, which would be basically the Virgin Mary, Madonna being another word for the Virgin Mary. And so the fleur-de-lis corresponds with Mary in so many different ways, including the fact, by the way, that when you look at old compass roses or you look at old compasses, there's 4 arrows for the directions. Dude, it's so mind-blowing that they will use the fleur-de-lis as the arrow for north. Okay, not for south, not for east, not for west, but for north. I've covered this before in other videos, right? So there is a fleur-de-lis correspondence with the north. Also, Mary was sometimes referred to as Stella Maris, which means the star of the sea. What star are we referring to here? We're talking about the North Star, because she was said to be the guiding star for Christ, right? And so there's a northern correspondence with Mary as well, actually. And to me, when you look at the star card, you're looking at the North Star, right? And when you're looking at that woman, she might as well be the Virgin Mary, in my estimation. This is how I break it down personally. Yep. And so it's the same figure. It's the same woman. She's always been connected to the stellar tradition. She's connected to lunar symbolism too, but she's more so connected to the stars, which is why she's on the star card. The star card corresponds with the stellar tradition. The moon card, which follows, corresponds with the lunar tradition. The sun card, which follows the moon, corresponds with the solar tradition. In the moon card, in the sun card, you have a young child. You always either have two children holding hands, or you have a young boy on a horse, or something along these lines, right? Because the sun and the solar tradition, the solarized world, this is the newest tradition. It's the youngest tradition, right? Which is in large contrast to the stellar tradition. So again, star card, Virgin Mary, stellar tradition, sun card, solar tradition, right? So Stella Maris, the star of the sea, the pole star, this is the world axis. Once again, this pillar is the world axis. And what do you see on top of the world axis? You see another expression, more of a spiritual expression of Mary herself, right? I think that's what you see at the very end of the pillar. And then to the right of her, you see the Virgin Mary once again throned, because the northern sky has been looked at as a throne, the throne of God, or the throne of the goddess. And so I think that that's what you're seeing when you zoom in there, which I don't think you can do here on StreamYard. But if you had a high resolution image of that, you will see that she is throned, and it looks like she has a crown. It's not uncommon for her to have a crown of stars, because once again, she's related to star symbolism. I'm thinking of Nuit.
Yeah,
right?
I was just thinking that, yes.
That's the symbolism. That's why you see Virgin Mary a lot of times wearing like a blue, shawl or something, or a blue robe, and then there's stars, all over it. And so the northern sky has been viewed as the throne of God or the goddess. That's the old symbolism, in my opinion. There's a lot of instances of virgins or maidens being associated with this pillar as well. I don't know if either of you guys have ever seen the Weeping Virgin sort of illustration from Freemasonry, but what you'll see is a woman who basically is Virgo. You could tell she's Virgo, and she's sitting or standing right behind a broken pillar, basically. So there's a number of traditions that link the maiden and the virgin with the pillar, which is basically the world axis. And here, this is what you're seeing in so many different ways. But actually, this one, I'm kind of curious to do more follow-up research on, because I want to know what's going on with the other figures. And as I said earlier, the pillar or post or pole predates the cross. That cross beam came later. Right. And again, there's debate on whether Christ was actually crucified on a cross, or if he was actually hammered and staked to a pole. So those are a few of the things off the top of my head.
Awesome. Thank you.
I want to read really quickly, like the description of this one here, the Redeemer. So to, add to what Mario was saying. So it says it includes several themes, including the creation and fall of man. In addition, we see representations of the world's incarnation, salvation, and glory. In the upper half of the image, we see life emerges from the blue center sphere, surrounded by the brightly shining border of an almighty God. A flame strikes down from the ball of light and the life to fill a sphere of emptiness with God's creation. Each of God's 6 days of creation illuminate the otherwise empty sphere beneath the source of life and spirit. So, absolutely.
Nice. Yeah, I like that illustration too, the Redeemer. That was kind of up on my list of maybe ones to cover.
Yeah.
But yeah, good stuff.
Very nice. One thing I did want to add, you started getting into the fleur-de-lis. you know, and that's sort of bringing up like things with the eyeball with me. But like I even wanted to mention, like there's been times where I've said this common visuals that I've had with the experiences that I've had, and like the thing inside the middle of the one on the Redeemer, like that dark part, if the center circle was like completely blacked out, that would actually be like a very good rendition of like something that is common all the time for me. Is seeing that in my mind's eye, but like black as like the blackest fucking black you could ever see in your life is going to be in the middle of it. And then it's like, that's when, like, I don't know, I've mentioned like you'll see explosions, which I have wondered now, because thinking about the way they look, they also do look like flowers blooming. So I'm wondering if even that has something to do with the whole rose symbolism, and like that part is the stem. I don't know, but you know, that's a common image that I will always see before shit gets crazy. And you had mentioned something about the fleur de lis, and then like the whole you know, someone receiving like a flower, right, or like flower petal. Yeah. You know, in not to get crazy with the eyeball stuff again, but like in the front part of your eye, when your pupil starts to change, when it wants to grow and start pumping, which could look sexual. When it does that, the waters in your aqueous humor will make a fleur de lis. And once you go above that section in your eye, once you go above that section of your eye, is exactly where I said you will get your orbis serrata that looks like a fucking flower petal, and then your hyaloid canal is the tree trunk, and the vitreous veins as the tree. So right there, if you're going in the progression of your story, there was a virgin who actually didn't get fucked because it's just in the eye. It's not actual physical sense. And then right above that is the flower that she got. The orbis serrata looks just like the flower.
Yeah. Interesting, dude. Yeah, no, there's a huge correspondence with how I see things from my axial polar northern perspective and then your eye business, which maybe we should do a show about at some point.
So, well, sometimes I'm questioning if the hyaloid canal might actually even be like part of the axis, because it will bend into an S. Like totally. That's another interesting thing not to keep going on. You will have it straight like this, and then if it changes, it will make an S. So now if you think of both eyes, each eye can do that or the bent one. I-S, I-S. I even think, I know as crazy as that sounds, I wonder if ISIS even comes just from what your eyeballs can do inside.
I see. That's interesting. Well, Isis, I mean, that's the correspondence here with the Virgin Mary, in my opinion. Isis holding Horus, right? And so you'll see Isis sitting down, throned, which is why I'm making a thing about her being throned up top and seemingly down below. But the throne is originally associated with the goddess. So when you see a king or an emperor and they are throned, they are actually emulating the goddess, in my estimation, in my opinion. It's effeminate to be sitting down. It's not masculine to be sitting down, right? And so I think that's part of the effeminization of man right now, and myself included, you know, being behind a computer screen and sitting down on a chair and everything else. In fact, I kind of look at the chair as potentially the modern day chariot, right? So now we're just rolling around several feet in our little offices and stuff like that online. We're not actually like in, you know, obviously we do travel and everything else, but I think the chariot has kind of been brought into the home, and it's more of a stationary sort of thing. And so the other thing I'll mention just real quick, I know Hildegard did she live her whole life in Germany? Is that just her background, or did she travel, right?
Well, she traveled to neighboring countries around where she actually preached. And back in the day, women were not allowed to preach at all. And she was able to get away with doing it.
I see. Gotcha. Because what I was going to say is that, you know, France has this underground current, this serious reverence for the Virgin Mary, the Black Madonna, is definitely, you know, part of all of that. I just rewatched the Da Vinci Code. I saw it many, many years ago, and a lot of the stuff has to do with Mary Magdalene and stuff like that. Also, but, so there's this understanding, there's this, kind of, I don't know, thread that you can follow, that when they were building the Notre Dame cathedrals in France, that they were actually placing them around the country to mirror the Virgo constellation. And so I made a video about this a few years ago. If people are interested in following that, it's very, very intriguing. I think there's something to be said about that. So that's one other thing that I wanted to mention. But the other thing here is that what I'm picking up from the symbolism is two things with this tilted pillar here. Is this symbolizing the shift away from the feminine to the masculine, away from the goddess to a demigod, away from the goddess to Christ, right? Is this basically symbolically representing a pole shift from woman to man? I think that's something to kind of consider here. Also, related to pole shifts, it's not exactly right, but it's said that, our axis, if you believe in a heliocentric sort of cosmology, I guess, that Earth is tilted 23.5 degrees. This isn't exactly 23.5 degrees, but it just reminds me of this axial shift, which there's several ways of kind of interpreting that. And so there is kind of this implication that the axis or the center or the focus potentially of the religion has shifted, or that originally it was on woman and then it got shifted to man, which I think is kind of like the sort of overall kind of arc with symbolism in general. More of this reverence for woman, the earth, the stars to begin with, now more so directed towards man and the sun, the solarized world.
Yeah, she was super into the divine feminine.
Mm-hmm.
She thought it was superior to the divine masculine, which she said she needed. You need them both. But she was quite a feminist of her day, and she was very into the divine feminine and thought it superior in her mind through her work.
Yeah. I could totally see that.
Awesome. All right, do you want me to move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
All right, awesome. We have the triple wall here, image 27. Which one of you actually picked this?
I picked this one.
Oh, okay. All right. Sure. I couldn't remember. Was there anything you wanted to really touch on with this one?
Yeah, so for this one, with me, I looked at it for a long time and I saw several things. So one, I don't know why it hit me in the beginning, Noah's Ark, like right off the bat, right? And then I started thinking about like all the scrolls. There's a lot of people, holding scrolls. There's this, I don't know where I got this from, but it's like, I've seen it somewhere on a podcast or something that Damien Eccles was talking about. And he's like, there's no one left to read the scrolls. Who's left to read the scrolls? And so it was almost like an amnesia that happened at a certain point where we forgot all the hidden knowledge. And so here it looks like they're on the bottom that there are actually deceased people. I mean, they're like dark green, almost kind of like a gray. And I wish I could have like flipped it around and looked at it from a different view so that the one, the bottom is the top and the top is the bottom. And then it reminded me of the three areas after Kether, the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof R. She has a lot of wall symbolism. And what I think this is from a different perspective, because you got to think these were visions. And I would also love to take all of these and lay them out on a floor and look at them all at once, because I think what this is a compilation of a big vision, almost like Pamela Coleman Smith when she painted that huge mural of every background in the tarot cards and made this huge mural out of it. I wonder if we were to spread these out and kind of lay them out, how different they would look if we looked at them as a whole. Because I think the perspective is like a bird's eye view coming from her, and we're limited by the human mind. And she was getting these divine visions and divine images. So Noah's Ark, first of all. And then I started thinking of, the three layers above Kether, when you cross the abyss, and then the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof R. And I think that's what these walls are. They're like limitations or different levels of consciousness. I think that's what she was getting at here. And that's pretty much all I want to say about that. But it just right off the bat, wish I could flip it upside down and see it from that point of view. But to me, it's like different levels of consciousness is what I think that she's perceiving. And she's looking at it from a divine, a traditional religion lens, as opposed to, an occult lens, obviously. But that's what I got for that.
Awesome. You know, there has been times where I've thought even some of the images we've shown already, if you flip them upside down, it'd actually be showing you something different too. I have wondered that with some of her artwork. The one thing I'm just going to chime in and say real quick, like with this, you know, in a tarot sense, believe it or not, it kind of still reminds me of the Fool in a sense, possibly, but just multiple, you know, people up there now. You know, still almost looks like a cliff, which is like, you see how like some people look like they're upside down?
Yeah.
You know, that'd be, I guess, like even if you walked off the cliff. But
and then she always puts two. Like if she's got, I noticed that in her art, there's always two. And I think it's a man and a woman together in every portal or every little spot where there's something, you know, people in these, you know, holes or archways like this. It's always two people. And I think that might represent the divine masculine and divine feminine.
Nice. I like what you said about the 3 levels of consciousness, because what little I know about Hildegard is, which I guess is really not a surprise at all, but this whole entire idea about there being a triune God, right? So this Trinity, basically, right? And so it does relate to that. I feel that the Ark, I can see that it almost looks like the sinking of the Titanic or something like that.
Yeah. Like that's what I immediately thought of.
Yeah. And then regarding the Fool, I just have to say, because also there's a Fool card or poster behind you, Megan, right? Yeah. Looking at the Rider-Waite Fool card lately, I've been really thinking about this idea of how forever I used to think that the Fool is scaling the mountain, being the, you know, the card that represents 0, the beginning of the major arcana. Clearly he's going on this journey up the mountain. But the more I think about it, I actually think symbolically he's might be descending the mountain. It's post-enlightenment. That's why he's living so lightly, you know, and so he's not going up. He's actually coming back down. And so that's something to consider for tarot people. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that the scrolls, look how vertical the scrolls are. And this is something that you're going to see in a lot of her paintings or illustrations that accompany this work, is that the scrolls are very long. They're elongated. Reminds me kind of a pillar, reminds me kind of a pole. It reminds me of another bridge between heaven and earth, which is what you're reading about, essentially, right? It's getting you closer to God. It's getting you closer to spirit, right? And so when you scroll up a scroll, what does it look like? It looks just like a pillar or a post or a pole. In Judaism, right, they use scrolls, right? They use scrolls that you scroll up from both sides. You know, and so the symbolism behind that, according to the Jews, and I have Jewish symbolic dictionaries here, they are literally referencing the 2 pillars in front of their synagogues. They're referencing the 2 pillars that were said to be in front of Solomon's temple. So the 2 scrolls of Judaism represent pillars, literally. So the scroll is another pillar symbol, and because you roll them up and you unfurl them, it has this spin sort of dynamic that I keep on talking about. So it's another axis symbol. So, and then you pull it out and then it becomes another axis symbol, especially when they're really exaggerated here, in my opinion. It's showing their connection to God. It might as well be a chain or a ribbon or a rope to the heavens, in my opinion.
You know what's interesting with the scroll, if you think about it, the way to pull it open, it's kind of like how I've gone on about like having to unyoke things. Like if you were to think about it, like they're not going in the same direction. They're actually spinning in different directions, but opening up. That sounds a little out there, but I also wanted to mention that, you know, I find it interesting, you know, with scrolls, my first thought of was Hode, because like you mentioned, he said something else that made me think about it, but like in Kabbalah, but Hermetic Kabbalah. In Hermetic Kabbalah, when you want to start with all these associations, Hode does have scrolls associated with it, just as Thoth or Mercury as well. So scrolls is a symbol for Hode as well. Just threw that in there.
Nice.
All right. You want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, sure.
All right, here we go. Oh, these are the ones that they were ready. Mario picked these 2 himself. So
I did. Yep. So I was looking at Hildegard stuff, and I came across these 2 pieces. My understanding, if I'm not mistaken, that this comes from a later work, right?
Yes.
Right, but it's obviously cosmological in nature. So she's explaining the nature of the cosmos. This could be likened to a map, right, of the cosmos itself. And this is just right up my alley for so many different reasons, because there's so many examples of different people and cultures whether they're channeling it or they're following a tradition where the cosmos is concentric ringed in nature, right? It's these different spheres. Spheres within spheres is another way of putting it. To me, wheels within wheels would be another way of putting it, right? But this sacred center, that's always what you need to focus on. And then everything kind of goes out from there. So what is the sacred center here in this illustration? Well, you know, if this is the cosmic man or if this is supposed to be Christ, I haven't even looked into what she really said about who this is, right? But there's these different ideas about man, you know, the micro and macro of man, right? But what is right there in the middle? It would be his penis, right? The penis is another axial symbol. It's another phallic symbol that represents this world axis, in my opinion. I can't remember who first introduced this idea to me, but penis is also an anagram for spine. And so the spine being very much, once again, related to this tower, column, pillar, whatever. So the fact that the penis is right there, dead center in the middle is very interesting. You'll see that in some ancient Egyptian artwork where you have Nuit, right? And she's the night sky. And then you have Geb down below. Sometimes you'll see two different things. I've seen versions where Geb has a huge erection and it's actually going to the middle of Nuit, right? And so it's acting as that world axis. Other times you'll see a figure right in the middle kind of helping support Nuit in a way, being that central pillar. And so kind of uniting this idea of a firmament, right, or a dome with that vertical pillar, kind of like the tent pole. That would be like another example of this, which we've talked about before, I know. But the tent pole is a world axis symbol. And so I was just recently looking up some stuff about voodoo, and it's not uncommon for there to be what's called a podomaton, a central pole in a place of worship, a temple, for voodoo practitioners, and they dance around this pole, and it's considered the pole of transcendence. Basically, they look at it as the navel of the universe. So here she's putting the penis as the center, but it also wouldn't be, you know, to me, out of line for her to have the navel be the universe. I've seen examples where the navel is considered to be that universe, which is connected, obviously was connected to your umbilical cord, which is connected to mom. So it's almost like the cord that does link you to other worlds or other realms, the cord that links you to the great goddess, basically, right? And so here you can see another example of these four winds in both versions, but they're done differently. So I need to do more follow-up research about what she was actually trying to get across with them being done differently. But you'll notice that there's three animals that are predominant here. And so on the left, you can clearly see that there's like a lobster. And then to me personally, I could be wrong here. It kind of looks like a bear, and it might be a bear, but I could be mistaken. So if anyone has information about that, please let me know. And then it looks like some sort of deer, right? And so the deer is basically a substitute symbol for Capricorn. Horned animals relate to Capricorn, relate to this time of year, to the winter, things like that. The goat would be, you know, obviously the animal that's mostly associated with Capricorn. And then so you have this lobster or this crab. To me, what she's showing is the winter and summer solstice. So she's showing Cancer and she's showing Capricorn. So she's showing the gate of man, which would be Cancer or the lobster. And she's showing the gate of the gods, which would be Capricorn. But here using a deer with horns, right? But in the middle, so what's going on with this bear? It's Ursa Major. In my opinion, it's Ursa Major, Ursa Minor, the Great Bear and the Little Bear. So these are the two constellations that are most closely associated with the North Star. They revolve around the North Star. And one of the things on why I think that this is the case as well is that when you look at what might be a bear, again, I'm open to interpretation here. What might be a bear at the top, you see that there's actually a line of stars coming from the upper left, going to the head of the bear. And what do you know? There's 7 stars. There's 6 stars along the line, and then there's the 7th star right there by it. So there's this cluster of 7 stars being associated with the bear. One of the things that I've learned very recently, and by the way, before I get to that real quick, this is where we get the swastika from. The swastika is the Great Bear going around the pole star throughout the year. So 4 times a year, once a season, it makes a swastika in the heavens, essentially. And this isn't, in my opinion, speculation. Many people have wrote about this. Many different groups from around the world have talked about this, including Native Americans, talking about the swastika being emblematic of Ursa Major going around the pole star. And some tribes talking about when they dance around a central fire, they are emulating the heavens going around the pole star, that the central fire literally is the North Star. Circumambulation, spinning, it's one of the oldest rituals and traditions you can come across. There's a reason why people go to Kaaba, go to Mecca, and go around the Kaaba cube. How many times? Seven times. Right. And so it's all the same symbolism. This is old world symbolism, in my opinion. But I just recently learned, thanks to the book that I shouted out earlier, Fundamental Symbols, that in the East, apparently Ursa Major was actually a boar, a wild boar. And that later on, when this idea basically migrated westward, it turned into a bear. So it went from a boar to a bear. But you still have words like Borea, like Hyperborea, beyond the north wind, beyond the north, or the Aurora Borealis, as kind of instances of this kind of like remnant there of this boar. So from boar to bear, there's an essay called The Wild Boar and the Bear that Renee Guénon wrote. And so if you want to look into that, I'm sure you can find it online for free. But this matches a lot of things that I've looked into lately. So I see that central location within that central man, that penis area, that is the North Pole. It's related to polar symbolism, which is why it's phallic in nature, why she decided to associate it that way. But as I said earlier, north is the center, but it's also up, right? So what do you see on the image on the right-hand side, 66? You see a couple of heads on top of each other. The head is symbolic of the north too in so many different ways. It also corresponds with Aries, right? But what they're saying is that the north, the upper part of this canvas, of this illustration, is transcendental. It goes beyond the canvas, so it even like bleeds off of that main frame. And you can see the head of God right there. So it's really interesting when you zoom into that part of the illustration. There's like 4 heads right there. There's the head of God, and then there's the head below, and then there's another head, and then there's the head of the of man right there. So that's symbolic of that central pillar that I keep on referring to and talking about. But I know there's other details that she's mentioned specifically, and people have pointed out like what the red ring is. It's like cosmic fire or something. And then, the blue ring, and then the water and all this other type of stuff. So I'm just kind of, going through this pretty quickly. But I thought these were worth bringing up and talking about.
No, for sure. When you sent them to me, I thought they were wild.
Yeah. So she was very into the elements. She used the elements in her use of herbology for holistic or natural medicine. Mm-hmm. And she assigned different herbs to different elements, and that's how she knew, depending on their symptoms, which herb to use. So she was very into the elements and, I'm sure astrology and all that stuff.
Right. Gotcha. Notice, too, what it appears to be going on here is that God is above the head that is towards the very top of the canvas. He's an older man. And then as you descend downward, the man inside appears to be younger than the 2 older figures. So it just goes to this idea that, the primordial universe, like the further out you go, the older things are, which kind of relates to Saturn in a lot of ways. Saturn being the furthest planet out under the traditional planetary system, being associated with time and death, and things of that nature. And so this kind of fits with that as well, I would say. So, yeah, there's a lot going on here that I'm going to do follow-up research on.
Awesome. One thing.
But yeah, that's what I got.
One thing I did want to just add real quick about, like, you were talking about going in certain directions. Mm-hmm. And again, especially with these things in front of me, I mean, of course, I'm still thinking about eyeball stuff. But, like, something that I do think is interesting, again, going back to our mound talk prior to the show, or even a tower And then I sometimes really do think that like this is actually part of the sex magic, but it's just a play off of words. Like your eyeball, again, when your pupil goes to grow in the back of your head because it's getting smaller and pulling back, it screws closed. Your pupil will literally screw closed, and as it's screwing closed, it's growing back into your head. So, it's getting big before it has its screws. You know what I'm saying? It's just, you know what I'm saying? Like a rising mound or a rising pupil. And like the reason that happens is because it's screwing closed. It's just
interesting. That's fascinating, man. The other thing this is reminding me of is just the axial transcendental symbolism with the eye, because it bridges the gap between the internal and the external. So it's like that is an axis. If you just visualize, or imagine the way your eyes are working and everything else, you've got these two cones or funnels or whatever. But there's something that pierces through, from inner to outer, basically, which is what all of this axial polar northern symbolism generally is all about. Just related to the phallus real quick, when you are having sex, you're taking a trip to the underworld. I'm pretty convinced of that. Symbolically, that's what's going on. And so woman would be the underworld, and your phallus is basically Mercury going on a journey, going to another place, basically. And so then when you ejaculate too, it's the same symbolism. It's like Kundalini rising, it's going up the world tree. It's the serpent going up the world tree. It's the Kundalini serpents going up your spine. It's Mercury going up, towards the heavens, right? Because he's a psychopomp. And so I see all of the symbolism as being just heavily related to each other, essentially. So I think it's well put, or I think it's well placed the way she decided to kind of put this together. But apparently this is just what she channeled, right? Which is really interesting.
One thing I did want to add, I did think, as silly as it sounds, I did question when Rihanna, this is going back a while ago, obviously, when she played, then she had like that big red, thing on. I did question if it was actually supposed to like symbolize like a lobster, and I thought it was for occult symbolism actually. So that sounds like
interesting, right?
Yeah, I was like, she looks like she looks like the lobster from the moon card.
I mean, lobsters, crustaceans in general, they're always considered to be like underworld creatures. The crab gets a really bad rap, and cancers get a bad rap a lot of the times. And they retreat and they scuttle side to side. They're underwater. They're, not super. I mean, I think they look cool, but you don't want to cuddle with them or anything.
Yeah. All right. So I think that will just wrap it up, which is perfect timing, about an hour and a half, where I like to try to keep them now so people can listen to it easier. Thank you both very much for jumping on. That was really an amazing, awesome discussion. It went way better than I ever could have imagined. The chat was amazing. I'm glad I decided to go live. That's exactly why I went live, is because I assumed on this topic we'd have people jumping in and commenting and adding great stuff. So like I say, when the live is still up, if you have a chance, check it out. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of good stuff inside the chat that goes along with the episode. Megan, real quick, let everybody know where they could find your stuff again.
Yeah, so I have my own YouTube channel. If you guys are interested, I cover a lot of occult, metaphysical, paranormal information. It's the number 7, Degrees of Wisdom 81 is the handle for my YouTube channel. I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as 7 Degrees of Wisdom. If you guys go to my YouTube channel, you can look at my about, and it'll take you to all my social media. I have a link tree, and that'll take you to everything that I have. So thanks again, guys. This one was really fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I really appreciate everything that you brought to the episode. Thank you.
For sure.
And Mario.
Right on. Yep. You guys can find me at symbolicstudies.com. Thanks for having me. This was a good time. When you first asked about this, I'm like, I don't know anything about this person, but I want to learn. If you think it's important, I looked at the artwork. I'm like, oh, what is going on here? Honestly, when I first looked at that gallery, I was like, my mind was like kind of confused, but I saw certain things and whatever. So it was just an interesting study. And, part of why I'm doing this is just to literally grow as a symbologist. And so I appreciate the introduction here. And yeah, I'm sure we'll do it again sometime.
Yeah, we definitely will. When I looked at the stuff and I was like, it's art, and you guys are both huge into tarot. So I was like, just made sense to ask you both. You know what I'm saying? Even though, like you say, it's tarot, you are kind of looking at art. That's exactly what you're doing. You're looking at art and trying to figure it out. So I figured who else better to have on than you two. So thank you very much. That went amazing. Again, thank you to everybody in the chat. That's what's up. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.